Hello and welcome to this video. I'm going to show you how to make a gold coin necklace using silver metal clay and Keum-boo. It's an ancient Japanese technique, which means that we can combine gold leaf or a gold plating on top of our pieces in a really nice way, and it's 24 karat gold, so it's a very special way to be able to add gold to your work. So to start off with, we can have a look at the samples. I've got a couple of gold coin disc necklaces here. So there's a small one which has a really nice pattern around it, and also a larger one with a deeper pattern. This technique does work best with shallow patterns, but you can see that you can also do it with slightly raised ones. You can also do it without a pattern at all, just on a flat piece. And we're going to be making our piece out of metal clay, but you can also use this technique on sterling silver. You just need to prepare it first. But for today, we're going to be working with metal clay, so I'm going to show you the tools and materials that we need to create this project. So we're going to have our usual metal clay setup, which includes our roller and either spacers or cards for measuring out the thickness of our clay. We're also going to need a stencil or a cookie cutter to cut out the shape of our design, and I'm using circles to make the disc, and a needle tool, which is for also going around and cutting out those disc shapes. Then we're going to have a work area, so I use Teflon. This is one of my favourite kind of non-stick mats. You could also roll out your piece on a texture plate if you prefer. Just make sure you oil it well so that your work is well protected. I'm going to use a texture. I really love this texture plate. It's called Jasmine Dream by Pam East. So thank you, Pam, for these. They're gorgeous. And but you can use any texture plate you like. I just think this is a really lovely pattern. And I found with gold kind of discs, I try and get something that I think will fit really nicely in the center. And the center of these textures work really well for that as well. We're going to need a pen and some scissors. So try and make sure you have some fine or sharp scissors, because that's what we're going to use to cut out the gold leaf. Then I've got my brass brush for polishing up my piece before I do the Keum-boo. One thing for this project that's a little bit different is we need lots of burnishers, and the more burnishers you have, the better really. So I've got 4. I've got 2 agate burnishers. Agate is a type of stone, so it's a slightly softer burnisher, and I've got 2 steel burnishers. They're also quite useful. I do prefer agate burnishers for this project because it's just a little bit softer on the gold, but whatever you have you can use, and the more you have the easier it's going to be. Then I've got my hand drill, which is going to be for making a hole in the piece. And I've got some tweezers for using when I'm touching a hot piece, or also when I'm using the foil, because it's very fine. I don't want to touch it too much with my hands. A sand pad, which I'll use to clean up the piece. I've got some cling film, which I always have on my table when I'm working with metal clay, just to be able to wrap up any clay that I'm not using at the time, to make sure it doesn't dry out and make the most of it. I've also got a bowl of water for quenching, so it's just a heat-proof bowl, and I've just popped some water in there so that I can quench it. What else do we have? Ah, of course, the all-important gold foil. So this is a 24 karat gold. When you're buying it online, it does say suitable for Keum-boo, and you'll see inside, this is the pack that I've got. So it's a kind of rectangle. I'll be able to do quite a lot of pieces with that depending on the size of them. So that's going to be fun to work with a little bit later. And it just comes in this little envelope. So try and keep it in there, keep it nice and safe so you don't lose it or accidentally. It's very light, so it's easy to kind of get stuck to something. So you just want to keep it nice and safe. I've got some metal clay. 5 grams is plenty for this project. It depends how big you'd like your coin to be, but 5 grams should be plenty. This is a 10-gram packet, so I can make quite a few pieces with this. Badger balm or some olive oil for greasing your work area. I've got some jump rings and a gold chain, which I'm going to use just to attach the piece when I'm finished with it. And finally, I've got a set of pliers just for, again, attaching my findings at the end, and a cutter as well, just in case I need to cut my chain. Might not need that one for this project. Then I have my firing brick and torch for firing my metal clay pieces. And finally, we are going to be using a hot plate. So I'll show you that a little bit later on in the project, but that's what we're going to be using for heating up the piece to add our gold for Keum-boo. And we also need a timer, but I use my phone for that, just for timing how long it's going to take to fire the metal clay. Brilliant, so they're all the bits and pieces we need, so go and get them ready, and I'll see you very shortly and we'll start making the gold coin necklace. As always, when you're working with metal clay, you want to get everything ready before we open the clay packet, because we want to minimise the time that the clay is exposed to air so it doesn't dry out quickly. So I've got my playing cards laid out and I've got my Teflon mat. I've got 5 cards on each side, and I'm going to go down to 4 cards when I put the texture on, because I want just a shallow texture for this piece, because I'm doing Keum-boo on it. I don't want a deep texture. So I've got my texture mat at the ready, and what I like to do is place my stencil sheet over it and just work out which size I'm going to use, taking into account obviously there's going to be some shrinkage of about 10%, and what exact pattern I want to go for. So once I've decided and I've got all my design in mind, I'm ready to open my clay. I've also got my roller, my badger balm and my needle tool at hand. So first off, I'm just going to open my badger balm, grease the area that I'm going to be working on to make sure none of the clay gets stuck. So pop a bit on my roller and on my mat, and plenty on my texture mat. Especially this one, it's very fine, so I want to make sure I've got plenty on there. Great, now we're ready to open the clay. This is a 10-gram packet and I don't need all of it, so I'm just going to take approximately half out and go for the bigger half. The spare bit I'm just going to wrap in my cling film to keep it really airtight for later. Then I'm just going to give it a roll on my 5 cards just to spread it out a little bit. Go down to my 4 cards, and then I've got my texture mat at the ready. Just going to take a little bit of time to place it in the right area over the top and do 1 firm roll. Oh, that was nice and firm, it stuck to it. It's all right, I can very gently peel it off. And there you can see that lovely texture has taken place. If you're not happy with the texture at this stage, now's a good time to roll out the clay and start again. But if you're happy with it, which I am, you can cut it out with your stencils. And just place my piece over, and I'm using a needle tool. You can also use an actual needle if you like, so they're very fine. I'm just dipping it in the badger balm so it's a little bit greased, not too much, and then I'll go all the way around. Lovely. And I'll just take off the excess clay that we don't need, and always wrap that up straight away back with the other clay, because it is silver after all. We don't want to lose any of it. Don't worry if it does dry out, you can reconstitute it, so it's not the end of the world, but we do our best to try and keep it nice and moist so we can use it again quickly. Great, and that is it for now. That's our coin. So I'm going to pop that on the hot plate and leave it to dry, and then it'll be ready to sand and drill. Now our piece is dry, we've left it on the hot plate for a while, we're ready to start sanding and drilling. So I'm going to start by drilling. So first of all, I just want to choose where I want the hole on my piece. And you can look at the samples, for this one I've done a hole at the top for the little one, and I've done quite a big hole because I wanted to fit 2 jump rings in. So this is an important thing to consider at this stage. And then for my larger sample, I've done 2 holes because I wanted the chain to go to the side. So that's something to have a think about at this stage, is how do you want to do it. This is another fairly small one, so I'm just going to go for 1 hole in the middle, and I'm using a 1mm drill bit to give it a fairly decent sized hole. I'm going to look closely at the piece and choose where I want the top to be. Place my drill and go for it. If you've not drilled metal clay before, it's important to remember that it's very fragile, so you don't want to push down or put any pressure on the piece. You're literally just applying a very small pressure from the top of your hand and twisting round. So you have to be a little bit patient and wait for it to go through, but if we do push, it can very easily break the piece, so it's not worth it. Give it a bit of time, it'll go through. And you can see it's working because you can see the little bits of dust coming out. It might be a little bit too small for you to see, but on your piece at home, you'll be able to see little bits of dust coming up as well. So I'm just going to drill till I get all the way through to the other side. Great. So now we're through to the other side, and go all the way through a couple of times. I also like to go through from the back just to make sure that that side is definitely well drilled too. Fab. Then I'm going to sand my piece, so I'm just using a bit of sanding pad. I don't need to do a lot because I've only got a shallow texture, but I'm just going to go around the edge, smooth it off. And it's really worth, as always with metal clay, spending the time now to make it really lovely and smooth, because once it's in metal, it's a lot more work to do all of those bits. If there's any bits on the front and back you need to do, then go ahead and do those. Again, always being very gentle with your piece at this stage. It's a very fragile stage. It's not like metal yet. Great. And then when I'm happy, I'm ready to fire. So I'm going to bring my brick over, place it on there. So I'm going to fire the piece for 3 minutes, and I'm going to use the timer on my phone and get my torch ready. Turn it on. Turn the gas on, flick the switch. So there's a little bit of smoke and often a little fire. That's the binder burning off from the metal clay. That's perfectly normal. Then your piece goes sort of dark, and then it will go a bright white colour. And then we're looking for that peachy glow. Then I'll start my timer. So the peachy glow is very soft. It's not orange at all. It's almost white with just a slight tinge. And you can see my piece physically shrinking. Sometimes it actually curls up as well. Don't worry about that, we'll flatten it out later. And I keep moving my flame around the piece as I'm firing to make sure that I don't focus just on one area and accidentally start melting it. If you've never done any metal clay before, I'd recommend taking the beginner's course just to learn about torch firing and all these things, because I am skimming through them quite quickly. But of course, always be careful when you're using a torch at home. Make sure your hair is tied back, there's nothing flammable around, and you've also got a strong fire brick like I've got to protect your surfaces. My time is up. I've turned off my torch. Remember, it's very hot, so don't touch it, put it somewhere safe. And also my piece is very hot, but it's now fired, so it's now in the silver stage. So I'm just going to grab my tweezers and quench it in a bowl of water. You can hear that nice quenching sound. Wonderful. So the piece is now fired, it is silver, So if I bang it, you can kind of hear the sound. And normally at this stage, I start polishing with my brass brush and go onto my polishing papers. But because I'm using Keum-boo, I want to keep it at this stage because it's going to adhere most effectively to the gold. The next thing I want to do is measure out my gold. So I've got my gold, just to make sure I've got no wet bits on my hands, and I can take it out of the packet. And the gold foil is very fine, so I don't want to touch it too much, but I can pull it out just very gently and place it on this piece of paper that comes with it. Then I'm just going to fold the paper in half. And put the gold right at the bottom. I like to put it right at the bottom in one corner so I know exactly where it is, because what I'm going to do next is draw out my circle so that I can cut out my gold. So using my piece, again, I just want to make sure it's nice and dry. So using my piece as the marker and a fine pen or pencil, I'm just going to draw all the way around. And drawing around the outside like this will make my gold a little bit bigger than the coin, but that's a good thing because it will then go slightly down the sides, which I quite like. Of course, if you weren't doing a gold coin or you just wanted to add a bit of gold, you could just cut out whatever shape you want. Some people use the little cutters, little kind of like hole punch cutters, or you can even just do specks by adding little bits and pieces. But I'm going to go for the whole piece. Using my scissors, I'm just going to cut round. You might be able to hear in the background, I've turned my hot plate up to high heat just to get it ready because we're going to be using that next. Wonderful, so now I can see my circular shape, and that will definitely be covering the whole of my coin. So next up, I'm going to put my coin onto the hot plate and leave it on there for a few minutes to get really hot. So I've turned my hot plate up to top temperature. I need this to be really hot because how Keum-boo works in terms of the process is this gold is going to be fused onto the silver using a mixture of heat and pressure. So the first thing we need to do is get it really nice and hot. You can see I've placed my piece on the hot plate and I have turned my hot plate up really high. So in terms of health and safety, be really careful at this stage. It will get very, very hot. And if you have heat-proof gloves, then that's a good thing to be able to wear. I don't always use heat-proof gloves when I'm doing this technique, but just be aware of the risk that you are going to be using your hands near the hot plate, and so it does help. If I was going to do a lot of Keum-boo in a row, I would use heat-proof gloves. Then I've got my burnishers, so I've got my agate burnishers and my steel burnishers. I'm going to start with 2 agate burnishers, and what I'm going to do is essentially I'm going to place the foil onto my piece, then I'm going to start rubbing it with my burnishers to help the metal to fuse, because it's heat and pressure that helps the gold to fuse. So I need to apply the pressure with the burnishers. Then I'm going to switch to my other burnishers and allow these to cool down, because what happens is the burnishers get very hot, and when they get hot they can start tearing the gold, which we don't want. If your gold does tear a bit, don't worry too much, because you can always add little bits on afterwards, so doesn't have to be perfect. Great, so now I'm going to get my tweezers and just place my foil onto the piece, and I'm going to look around to make sure that it is nice and centered, because once it starts fusing I won't be able to move it. A tiny bit more this way. Okay, and when I'm happy I start with the center of the piece, just applying gentle pressure, and I tend to use one burnisher to hold it and the other one to push, and I work from the in out. because I don't want any kind of bubbles or creases. And this does take a bit of time, so I'm going to spend a bit of time on it. I'm not pushing too hard because I don't want the piece to fly off, so you obviously have to be careful. But I also am applying a pressure. If you're doing this for a while and nothing happens, what that normally means is the piece isn't hot enough. So just to be aware. But I can see already that it is starting to join to the piece. So if I tried to move that foil off now, I would really struggle. So that's a good sign. Giving it a good rub, moving it around. I find this a very satisfying process. Joining the gold and watching the piece turn to that beautiful gold colour. And then once I feel like I have worked towards the edge, what I'll do is just start going in around the edge a little bit. But I do want to make sure I get all of the top first. So hopefully you can see it's starting to take the texture. It's not gone all the way in yet. And then in a moment I'm going to switch to my steel burnishers, just to give these ones a bit of time to cool down. If you have just agate, that's fine, or even if you have just steel, that's fine. The issue with the steel ones is they do get hotter faster. So if you're choosing just one, if you're buying them, I would get just agate. So I'm actually nearly there. All I'm doing now is just continuing to apply that pressure, make sure that there's no air bubbles or loose bits and that it's all really nice and fused. Sometimes because the area gets so hot, you can't tell how well everything's fused until you look really closely. You can take it off, cool it down, look at it, and then come back and do a bit more. And then when I'm happy with it, the next thing I want to do is find my hole. Okay, so I know it's there. Just by flipping it over, I can see where it is. There we go. Just going to poke it in and twist it round to fuse that bit as well. And when I'm happy that it's all nice and fused, I can take my piece off of the hot plate. I'm going to place it on a steel block to cool it down. If you don't have a steel block, just place it on a heat-proof area because it's going to be very hot, a very hot metal. You don't want to put it on your regular surfaces. So you can put it back on your fire brick if you like. And just leave it to cool. We don't want to quench it. And then we can inspect it a bit further and see if we need to do any more. So now my piece is completely cool and easy to touch, and I'm happy with the fusing. I'm ready to attach it to my chain. First of all, I'm just going to brush the back because the back is silver still and I haven't really done anything to it yet. So I'm just going to give that a brass brush. And you can polish the whole back. In fact, I'd recommend polishing the whole back with your polishing papers, going through your grades and also the glanol. Just to make it a really nice professional finish, even though it's the back, it's important. With the front, I tend not to do anything else because we've already burnished it, so we've got that really nice shine. But if you did want to polish it, you can. Just be a little bit careful because even though it's adhered to the piece, it's not a thick layer. So we don't want to be sanding it or anything like that. And then I simply attach it to my chain using a pair of pliers. So I'm just going to pop it on a jump ring. Open that up and thread it through. And I've got a gold filled chain, which I'm using here to match. You could use a solid gold chain, gold filled. You could use gold plated, although I'd recommend gold filled as it's just lasts that little bit longer. So bring that to a close and there we have our gold coin necklace. And if you did want to do an actual coin shape, you could do that very easily by just using a mold of a coin. So you could use your 2-part molding compound to make a mold. You just have to be a bit careful about the actual coins that you use. I've seen lots of kind of Roman coin replicas on eBay and things, so you could get some of those. If you're using modern day coins, I don't think that that's allowed, or certainly not for selling, so just be careful about that. And yeah, this is a wonderful technique whether you want to make this kind of project or you want to make something very different and just add the Keum-boo technique to it. They don't have to be only flat pieces. You can do it on curved pieces and rings as well. It's just a little bit more tricky, so I'd start with a flat piece first and build up your confidence. The key to this technique is heat and pressure, so make sure your piece is already fired and that it's silver, fine silver. Cut out your Keum-boo, put it on the hot plate, make it really hot, and apply that pressure with the burnishers. And good luck with your making. So I hope you enjoyed that project. I'll see you on the next video for some more ways to add gold to metal clay.